So in today's video, I'm going to teach you some male sexual mastery secrets from the Eastern traditions of tantra and Taoist sexual practices. And this is the sex education that you never got in school. The sex education that we get is often very shallow and surface level, and it doesn't ever really go into the deeper energetics of sex and what's actually happening in that process. Most men see sex as a release, as a pleasure-seeking, comfort-seeking behavior, and it really limits our potential. It really limits our fulfillment from life and the pleasure that we can get from sex. So we're going to look at reframing our relationship with sex. You're going to have a completely new understanding of sex and have a better relationship with yourself, with your energy, and with your partner. This is going to help you to become a more skillful lover, to feel more confident, to feel more embodied, and to cultivate more vitality and more energy in your life. Sex should be energizing, it shouldn't be draining, and most men have a problem with their sexual energy being drained from them all the time. So in this video, we're going to look at the difference between men and women's sexuality. We're going to look at the scale of arousal and how we can actually undercut the point of no return and experience orgasms without ejaculating. We're going to look at the fundamentals of sexual mastery, and we're also going to look at sexual energy. So, what is sexual energy? Most men look at porn, they look at masturbation, they look at sex as a way to release tension, as a way to feel comfort and to feel momentary pleasure. And this is a really limiting view of sex. It really limits how much fulfillment and pleasure you can get. So, sex here can be understood as a sacred energy exchange. There is a deeper level of sex that happens. It's not just two bodies coming together. It's not just a physical process. There is an internal energetic process that's happening. There's a sharing of energy. When we learn to feel this internal energy and to be able to share it with a partner, sex actually becomes very energizing and very intimate and very connecting, as opposed to just being a very lustful or very physical or animalistic urge. So sex should be for intimacy, connection, and pleasure, not release and comfort. So when we begin to reframe our relationship to sex in this way, it becomes a means of deeper intimacy and connection. It's also to help cultivate energy. When we learn about the internal energetic structure of our body with the energy centers and the energy channels, we learn to be able to send orgasmic energy and arousal through those centers. Sex actually becomes a very energizing practice. Most men feel depleted after sex. They ejaculate and there's a loss of energy, there's a loss of that build-up and that potency, and then there's that slump that comes after ejaculation. However, if you're practicing these principles, sex can become very energizing and help you to cultivate more life force, more creativity, and more abundance in your life. Sexual energy has a very healing property. Working with sexual energy can heal shame, can heal trauma, can heal those wounded parts of ourselves by finding that sense of safety and that sense of vulnerability with someone else, with another partner, or even with yourself. It can also be transforming. Sexual energy can help us to awaken our potential, and we can use that energy to transform ourselves on a deeper level. Sexual energy by its very nature is creative energy linked to the sacral chakra, and it has a quality of amplifying and of magnifying anything that you direct it towards. So you can really use this creative energy to channel in a different way. You can use it in lovemaking, but you can also harness that energy, cultivate it, and transform it through the body, and start directing that into other areas of your life, whether that's your art, whether that's your business, your health, your relationships. You can start to use that creative energy to amplify whatever you direct it towards. And this happens through the act of transmutation. And if you want more information on this, watch the video I made on the microcosmic orbit and how to transform your energy through semen retention. But essentially, this sexual energy as a raw source of fuel can be refined, and it can be transformed through the body into a more refined, subtle substance, a more subtle life force energy, and even awaken spiritual qualities within us, increase awareness, elevate our consciousness, and help us to transmute that energy to transform ourselves on a deeper internal level. So as you can see here, it awakens latent potential, elevates consciousness, and increases your aura and magnetism. When you have this abundance of life force and creative energy, when you're not constantly depleting yourself through excessive ejaculation, through shallow relationships, through lust and through porn, then you have this build-up of vitality to work with, and it can really begin to transform you on a deeper level. So, how is men and women's sexuality different? This is where a lot of frustration can come from, especially from women in the bedroom, is this misunderstanding between men and women's sexuality. So in the Taoist and tantric practices, they describe a man's sexual energy as being like fire. It comes on very quickly and it comes on very hot. It's very raw, it's very primal. But it can also easily be extinguished by water. Now, a woman's energy is more like water. It takes time to boil. To reach that same temperature that fire can reach, it takes time. It builds up gradually and slowly. So to bring a woman to the point of being sexually awakened to her full potential, it takes sensuality, it takes foreplay. Men can be very goal-orientated and focused in sex, which can then create this kind of mismatch between the man and the woman. A man generally goes straight to the genitals before warming up fully, which can really shut a woman down. So how we can begin to equalize this playing field is to actually slow down our rate of arousal, to spend more time on foreplay and more time on the build-up towards sex. You know, for women, sex starts way outside of the bedroom. It starts that day. It starts with flirting. It starts with a bit of conscious touch. It starts with mental arousal. It starts with anticipation. Whereas for men, we're very much just in the moment, we can get aroused. What we want to do is spend more time bringing the woman to boil and slow down our rate of arousal so that we actually meet somewhere in the middle. And this is where you can then begin to build that sustaining pleasure and that longer lasting sexual experience by harmonizing that yin and yang energy. So I'm going to quickly explain the arousal scale that most men experience. So on this side we have arousal 0 to 100, and you'll see why it goes higher in a second. And this scale is time. The model for most men is that they get aroused fairly quickly, and it rises, keeps going. We generate friction, we generate pleasure, we generate arousal, and you reach this scale quite quickly. And here at 100, this is the point of ejaculation. So for most men, you hit that point, and then there's a very quick drop off, and that's what we call the refractory period. And this is that post-ejaculation slump where there's the loss of energy and the loss of build-up. And that is because this whole time, during sex, you're building arousal, you're building energy, and it reaches a certain threshold, and around about here, this is about 95%. And this is the point of no return. So once you go over this line, you've reached that threshold, and then ejaculation is imminently happening at 100. And then there is this crash afterwards. What most men don't realize is that ejaculation and orgasm are actually two separate processes. So ejaculation is actually a very physical process. It is this buildup of tension in the pelvic floor, which then triggers nerves in your nervous system to create these spasms, which will then contract certain muscles and it will expel the sexual fluids. So that is ejaculation. Orgasm is actually an energetic phenomena. It's a wave of pleasure that goes through the body. It just so happens that in most men, the orgasm and ejaculation happen pretty much simultaneously. As soon as that orgasm is triggered, the ejaculation is also triggered as well. So the practice of Tantra and Taoist sexual practices is learning to separate those two. Learning to separate orgasm from ejaculation. Now, how can we do this? We do this by working with this scale in a very different way. So, what we have to do is slow down our rate of arousal, is not to rush to these higher states of pleasure. Most men tend to build that arousal quite quickly because that's where we feel the most pleasure. It might be through unhealthy masturbation habits, it might be through porn, it might be through chasing that kind of sharp pleasure. There's a kind of rush to get to this higher state of pleasure. And what we don't realize is there's actually a whole range of pleasure that can be felt on this lower scale. So to trigger an orgasm without ejaculation, there are many steps we need to take. This is a rewiring process of the body. But essentially how this looks is you dip under this point of no return. So the rate of arousal is much slower. It builds up much slower like this. And it goes in waves. You might come down a bit, goes back up, building slowly, sustaining for a bit, coming back up again. And you can see already how this is extending the time of lovemaking or the pleasure that you can experience. And right around here is the point of no return. Let's say the point of no return is around here, 95%. What you actually do is approach this edge, but you actually cut underneath it. So you don't trigger the physical process, you don't trigger the nervous system, you don't trigger that contraction phase in the pelvic floor. And this actually allows your energy to continue building. And this is where you're going to begin to start having tantric states of orgasm, higher states of pleasure without ejaculation. So when we say you have an orgasm without ejaculation, it's not necessarily the same as having an ejaculatory orgasm where you get the contractions. It will feel different. But what it will feel like is a wave of pleasure that goes through the body. And at first it's quite subtle, but over time that will start to build up and start to become more powerful as your nervous system awakens, as your energy body awakens, as you're sending energy through these channels, it becomes more and more powerful and more pleasurable. So you can end up, reaching higher and higher states of pleasure without ever ejaculating. Now at this point we need to be able to start integrating this sexual energy into the rest of the body, and we can do this through embodiment practices, we can do this through massage, we can do it through breath work, we can do it through shaking the body, certain yoga poses, and this is going to help circulate and integrate that sexual energy. You can then start directing it towards certain energy centers, or you can just lie back and let it absorb into the body, and this is going to increase your state of vitality and health and help you feel more energized. Or if you choose to ejaculate at this point, you may take a bit of a dip, but you may not go right down to the bottom because you've been able to build this energy and integrate it as you go. So, fundamentals of sexual mastery. How do we begin practicing this stuff? Like I said, this is a process of rewiring your body, of rewiring your nervous system. It's learning to have a different relationship with sex and with your sexual energy. And it's learning to enjoy intimacy and arousal and pleasure in a different way. We're not seeking this sharp pleasure, we're not seeking release, we're seeking to build energy, we're seeking to connect with our partner, and we're seeking to share that energy with our partner. Some of the very basic things we can look at are the pelvic floor. Now the pelvic floor is a very important part of the body to be aware of during sex and when practicing sexual mastery, because tension in the pelvic floor is actually what leads to ejaculation. So you may notice when you get close to ejaculation, the pelvic floor begins to squeeze and begins to tense up, and this is an involuntary contraction. Now what we want to learn to do through sexual mastery practice is to be able to not have those contractions happen. It's to be able to fully relax the pelvic floor so that when you're being stimulated, your pelvic floor isn't tightening up, because that tightening of the muscles there is what actually triggers the nervous system to trigger the ejaculation process. So if your muscles are relaxed, if your pelvic floor is completely relaxed, you're breathing deeply, you're circulating your energy, you can stay below this point of no return and eventually undercut that point and build these orgasmic waves. The next one is breath. So breath, again, is a very fundamental practice of ejaculation control. We have to breathe deeply and slowly to be able to control our arousal, to be able to control our energy. Most men, when they get close to ejaculation, the breath kind of becomes short and shallow, which also triggers the nervous system to trigger that ejaculation. So if you can breathe very deeply and slowly, you keep your nervous system in the parasympathetic state. And this is going to help you to experience full body orgasms without ejaculating. This state of full body orgasm is only possible if you can stay in the parasympathetic nervous system state and not go into that sympathetic state which triggers ejaculation. Next is movement and sound. So again, during sex, we don't want to be rigid. We want to be able to move our bodies. We want to be able to make sound. We want to be able to move that energy through us. A lot of men pick up unhealthy masturbation habits, hunched over a computer, not moving their body and basically just beating it off. And it creates a very unhealthy habit and pattern in how we relate to our sexual energy. And this is another tip actually for most men. Your masturbation habits are a direct reflection of the sexual experiences you will have. So most men masturbate for release. They masturbate to get to that edge fairly quickly, and it's just something you do before bed or as like a pleasure, comfort seeking thing. Essentially what you're doing there is you're training your body and you're training your sexual response system to have that same response when you're with a partner. So this will make it very difficult to have these kind of experiences because you're so used to rushing to that edge and to maximizing pleasure as quickly as possible. Triggering this ejaculation, that is the default mode that your sexual response system is going to be in when you're engaging in sex. So it's about learning new masturbation habits, developing a new practice with yourself to be able to slow down, to be able to really build your arousal gradually, to be able to use your breath and to be able to begin circulating this energy. And we can use the breath, movement and sound to help this energy. It builds up in the pelvic floor, and then we can use our breath and sound to circulate that energy and start moving it through the body. Next one is nervous system. So again, I've touched on this briefly. You have the two pathways of your nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic response. The sympathetic response is your fight or flight system, and it's also the pathway that is responsible for ejaculation. So learning to rewire yourself and to rewire your relationship with pleasure and to be able to breathe deeply and keep yourself in this parasympathetic nervous system state, you're able to then start enjoying these waves of pleasure and letting them build gradually without triggering yourself into that other state and triggering the ejaculation. So again, this is closely linked to breath and movement and sound as well. This is what's going to help keep you in that parasympathetic state as you're engaging in sex, to awaken your full body and to awaken your orgasmic capacity. Next one is energy circulation. Watch my video on the microcosmic orbit for a deeper dive on this topic. But essentially it's about understanding the subtle body and understanding the energetic structure that our body has, being able to circulate this sexual energy up the back of the spine, cool it down through the front channel, and to be able to create this orbit of sexual energy so that it's not building up in the pelvic floor. If we allow the energy to build up in our pelvic floor, we're going to reach this threshold. So what we need to do is open up the channels in the body and allow this sexual energy to circulate, sending it upwards, using the breath, using our visualization and our intention to circulate that energy through the body to avoid us hitting this point of no return, which is what's going to allow us to undercut that and experience these full body waves of orgasm. And finally, attitude and mindset. Now, this is massively important for sexual mastery practice. Firstly, you need the attitude that sex is not about release. It's about expanding your capacity to experience pleasure and to deepen your intimacy and connection with a partner. So we need to go into it with this attitude that it's not for the release. It's for making eye contact, it's for touching each other, it's for foreplay. You know, foreplay is sex, especially for women. The main event is not necessarily intercourse. You know, it's all the things you do in between, it's all the things you do leading up to sex. So going into it with this mindset, realizing there's no goal or outcome to achieve. You know, most men think I need to make her come. Most men think I need to last this amount of time. Most men go into the sexual experience with some sort of goal or performance-oriented mindset. We need to really get ourselves out of that to be able to connect with a partner, to be able to connect with women. They just want you to be present in the experience. They want you to love their body. They want to enjoy that moment with you. They don't want to feel like they're being worked. They don't want to feel like they're being used. They want to feel like they're being loved. As a man, you can still enjoy a woman's body and you can still ravish them and you can still really enjoy that experience, but it's how you do it. You know, a woman can feel the intention behind that. And this is where it ties into sex as an energy exchange. It's not just a physical process. There's an energetic exchange happening. So it's not necessarily even what you're doing or the technique you're doing, it's how you're doing it in that moment. What's the level of consciousness that you're in whilst you're doing that? That's what she's really going to feel. So that's the mindset shift. So there we go. That's a brief overview of male sexual mastery. Now, this is a very deep topic that we could talk about all day. We could go into any one of these things in length. Let me know if you'd like to learn more information about any of these subjects. Leave a comment, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and please do subscribe for more videos on self-mastery, sexual mastery, and personal transformation. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.